The HOA meeting stretched late into the night, voices grinding against the silence of the community centre like boots on gravel. The humidity made tempers short and insults cut sharper than usual. Sergeant Major Elias Thorne stood in the back like he always did, sleeves rolled up, exposing the jagged, burn-scarred skin on his forearms. That was all it took. The scars caught the eye of the HOA President, Brenda, and her enforcement committee in the front row. She smirked loud enough for the room to hear. "Look at him," she whispered to her vice president, covering her mouth but not her microphone. "Probably got those burns falling asleep with a cigarette. And he thinks he can bring that trash into our neighborhood?" Laughter broke out, a ripple of amusement at his expense. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't turn. He just kept his eyes forward, holding his hat steady in his hands. Silence was his only defense. They thought they knew who he was, a lonely, disfigured old man who couldn't afford to live there. They didn't. Before we reveal the shocking truth about Elias, tell us in the comments, have you ever dealt with a neighbor who judged you without knowing your story? Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. We bring you true stories of karma where real heroes put bullies in their place. Let's get into the story. Sergeant Major Elias Thorne was 55 years old, but his eyes held the weight of 1,000 years. He had moved into the pristine, gated community of Oakwood Estates 6 months ago, seeking the one thing he had never found in 30 years of service: peace. His world wasn't firefights, night raids, or the scream of incoming artillery anymore. It was tending to his small garden, fixing the engine of his 1970 Ford truck, and keeping his property immaculate. Oakwood Estates was the kind of place where people measured their grass with rulers and judged you by the year of your car. And in this world, Elias was an anomaly. While other neighbors competed for the yard of the month with expensive landscaping crews and chemical treatments, Elias did everything himself. Every morning at 0500 hours, sharp as a razor, he was outside. His grass was cut to military precision. His hedges were squared away. But in the center of his flower bed stood something that drove the HOA insane. It wasn't a porcelain gnome or a white stone fountain or a tasteful bird bath. It was a twisted, blackened piece of jagged metal, about 3 feet tall, planted upright in the soil like a tombstone. It looked melted in places, scarred by intense heat, and sharp enough to cut. He had surrounded it with simple purple flowers, purple hearts specifically, but nobody in the HOA knew enough about botany or military history to catch the symbolism. To Brenda, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, it was an abomination. Brenda was the kind of woman who woke up angry and went to bed disappointed. She patrolled the neighborhood in her golf cart, measuring trash cans and peeking over fences. To her, Elias wasn't a quiet neighbor. He was a stain on her perfect property values. She didn't see a hero. She saw a damaged old man with scary scars and industrial waste in his front yard. The contrast was sharp. Brenda and her board members were loud, brash, convinced that power came from a clipboard and a fine book. Elias was the opposite. Soft-spoken, steady, humble. He didn't brag about where he had been. He didn't push back when Brenda threw fines his way. He simply endured them like a soldier enduring a storm. And then there were the scars. Burn marks that twisted up his arms like vines disappearing under his shirt. The skin was tight, discolored, and clearly painful. To most residents, they looked ugly. In the grocery store or at the mailbox, whispers always started when someone noticed them. Meth lab explosion? Someone would mutter near the produce section. Well, probably passed out drunk near a bonfire. Another would guess at the mailboxes. The laughter that followed never seemed to touch him. Elias never explained, not once. He kept his sleeves rolled just high enough that the truth was always visible, yet hidden. Whether it was stubbornness, pride, or penance, no one knew. But he never defended himself, never offered a story, never gave them the reaction they desperately wanted. To his neighbors, he was a joke. To Elias Thorne, those scars were a map of a hell he had walked out of alone, while carrying the weight of those who didn't. The bullying escalated quickly and brutally. The first time it happened in public was at the community pool. Elias was repairing a broken gate latch, something the HOA had ignored for weeks, for free. He was on his knees, screwdriver in hand, when Brenda walked in with her entourage of concerned citizens. She saw his scars in the sunlight. She stopped, feigning shock. "Good Lord," she said, pointing a manicured finger. "We really need to screen who we let into the pool area. It looks like a burn ward in here." "Elias, cover that up. You're scaring the children." A ripple of nervous, cruel laughter moved through the group. Elias didn't pull his arm back. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look up immediately. He just finished tightening the screw, tested the latch with a click-clack, and picked up his tools. He stood up, towering over her for a brief second. "Gate's fixed, Ma'am," he said softly, eyes locked forward, 1,000 yards away. Brenda rolled her eyes, annoyed that he hadn't snapped. "Just get out of my sight and take your trash with you." He walked away, leaving the silence to sit heavy in the air. To everyone watching, he was fair game. A punching bag who wouldn't fight back. It got worse. The fines started piling up in his mailbox like snow. $50 violation. Unauthorized yard decor, referring to the metal piece. 100 violation. Unapproved gardening hours for watering at 500. $250 violation, creating a public nuisance, for fixing his truck in his own driveway. One hot Tuesday afternoon, 2 board members leaned against a golf cart, sipping iced coffees, watching him weed his garden around the metal structure. They didn't know he could hear them. "I bet he dug that scrap out of a dumpster," one laughed. "Probably thinks it's art." "I give it a week before we foreclose on him," the other chuckled, checking his watch. "Guy probably can't even afford the dues on a veteran's pension. We'll buy the house cheap, bulldoze that garden, and put in a nice fountain." Elias kept working. His hands, strong and scarred, pulled the weeds with gentle precision. He didn't flinch. He didn't fire back. But in the reflection of his window, his eyes burned for just a moment, a flash of the predator he used to be, the man who had hunted in the dark before softening again. He wasn't that man anymore. He promised himself he wouldn't be, but the silence might have swallowed him whole, if not for the final inspection. Brenda had finally had enough. She wanted the metal piece gone. It was personal now. She organized a compliance raid, bringing the entire HOA board, a lawyer, and a hired contractor with a truck to forcibly remove the garbage from Elias's yard. They arrived on a Tuesday evening, just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the perfectly manicured lawn. Elias was on his porch drinking iced tea, rocking slowly in his chair. Brenda marched up the driveway, heels clicking aggressively. "Mr. Thorne," she announced, clipboard in hand, voice projecting for the neighbors to hear. "We are seizing this unauthorized structure. It violates Section 4, Paragraph C of the bylaws regarding aesthetic standards. It is ugly, it is dangerous, and quite frankly, it looks like trash. Just like the rest of this property. Elias stopped rocking. He set his tea down. He stood up slowly, his knees popping slightly. "Don't touch it, Brenda." It was the first time he had spoken back in 6 months. His voice was low, vibrating with something dangerous. Brenda blinked, surprised. But then she laughed. "Excuse me? Are you threatening me?" "Boys, load it up. Toss it in the scrap heap." The contractor, a burly man in a neon vest, reached for the metal piece. "That is not scrap." Elias's voice dropped an octave. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. "That is titanium alloy from the fuselage of a Black Hawk helicopter. It is a memorial." Brenda paused. She looked at the twisted metal, then back at Elias. A cruel smile spread across her face. "A helicopter? Oh, please. What is this, some PTSD fantasy? Did you crash your little toy plane?" "It's going to the dump. Take it away." The contractor grabbed the metal. Suddenly a low rumble shook the ground. It wasn't thunder, and it wasn't a truck. It felt like an earthquake. The water in Elias's glass rippled. The neighbors turned. Brenda froze. The contractor let go of the metal. Rolling down the quiet suburban street wasn't a delivery truck. It was a convoy. 3 massive black government SUVs with tinted windows and diplomatic plates. Flanking them were 2 military police motorcycles with lights, flashing but no sirens, silent, deadly serious. They moved with predator-like grace, taking up the entire width of the street. They pulled up right in front of Elias's house, boxing in Brenda's golf cart and the contractor's truck. The doors opened in unison. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Men stepped out. Not just soldiers, these were giants. Beards, oak tree shoulders, wearing expensive tailored suits that couldn't hide the lethal power underneath. They wore dark sunglasses even in the fading light. They noticed everything. They scanned the perimeter, their eyes landing on Brenda, then the contractor, and finally on Elias. And when they saw Elias standing on the porch, surrounded by people mocking him, they didn't laugh. They went stone cold. From the lead SUV stepped a man with silver hair and 3 stars gleaming on his collar. Lieutenant General Vance. He walked with a cane, but he moved with an authority that made Brenda's clipboard feel like a toy. Brenda's mouth fell open. She stuttered, You can't park here. This is a private lane. You're blocking the HOA patrol." The general didn't even look at her. He didn't acknowledge her existence. He walked straight past her, his boots crunching on the driveway. He walked up to the garden, right to the jagged, blackened piece of metal Brenda had called trash. He took off his cover hat. He bowed his head. The other men, 6 of them, all hardened special operators, who looked like they could dismantle a tank with a screwdriver, lined up behind him. Then the general looked up at Elias. Elias stood on the porch, his hand trembling slightly. His eyes were wet. Without a word, the 3-star general straightened his shoulders, snapped his heels together, and lifted his hand in a slow, crisp salute. "Present, arms!" The command echoed through the neighborhood. The 6 operators behind him snapped to attention in perfect unison. Snap. The air shifted instantly. The contractors dropped their tools. Brenda's clipboard clattered to the sidewalk. Silence spread across the yard like a wave, but this was a different kind of silence. It was heavy. It was sacred. The general held the salute for a long 10 seconds. "Sergeant Major," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We came to pay respects. It's the anniversary. 20 years today. Elias returned the salute, his scars stretching painfully as his arm rose. "Good to see you, sir."
"I didn't think you'd come."
Brenda, shaking, unable to read the room, tried to intervene one last time.
"Excuse me, Officer General?
"Whoever you are."
This man is violating HOA rules. That metal it's garbage."
The general turned. He didn't yell. He just looked at her. He looked at her with eyes that had seen wars, famine, and death.
Eyes that made Brenda feel very, very small.
He stepped closer to her, towering over her. "Ma'am," the general said, his voice cutting like a knife through the humid air. "That garbage is the only piece left of Extraction 4 Alpha." He pointed to the twisted metal. "That is the doorframe of a Black Hawk that went down behind enemy lines."
The man standing on this porch.
He didn't hide. He didn't run. He pulled 4 of my best men out of a burning wreck with his bare hands, while jet fuel melted the skin
Off his arms.
Brenda gasped. She looked at Elias's arms, the scars, the burn ward jokes she had made. The general continued, his voice rising slightly.
"He didn't get those burns falling asleep with a cigarette, Mom.
He got them walking into fire so I could go home to my children. So these men behind me could go home to theirs."
That metal isn't trash.
"It is a sacred monument to the 2 men who didn't make it out."
"And you?"
"You are standing on hallowed ground and calling it garbage."
A hush fell deeper over the neighborhood.
The neighbors who had mocked him, the ones watching from their windows, the ones on the lawn, shifted uncomfortably. Shame flooded their faces. Some looked down at their feet. Brenda looked from the general to Elias, shrinking until she looked like a child caught stealing.
I didn't know," she whispered, her voice trembling.
"You never asked," Elias said softly. "You never once asked." The general turned back to his men.
"Company order, arms!"
They lowered their hands. The general reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He walked up the steps and handed it to Elias. "The president wanted you to have this reissued."
"Elias, we know you lost the
"Original in the fire when your house burned down years ago."
Elias opened it.
"The gold of the Distinguished Service Cross, the 2nd highest military award for valor, glinted in the evening sun."
"Thank you, sir," Elias whispered,
a tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. The general turned to Brenda one last time.
His face was hard as stone.
"If this memorial is touched again, Mum, if one weed is pulled, if one fine is issued, I will consider it a desecration of a military gravesite, and I will bring the entire weight of the U.S. Department of Defense legal team down on this tiny,
insignificant HOA. Do we have an understanding?"
Brenda nodded rapidly, too terrified to speak. Yes, sir, absolutely." The general patted Elias on the shoulder. "We're grabbing dinner at the diner down the road. You coming, Sergeant Major?" Elias smiled, a real smile for the first time in months. "Let me get my coat." The convoy left as quickly as it arrived, leaving behind a silence that felt different this time. It wasn't the silence of mockery. It was the silence of awe. From that day forward, no one mocked Elias Thorne. No one joked about his scars. The fines disappeared from his mailbox. The men who had laughed now stood a little straighter when he walked past, their voices quieter, their eyes respectful. Brenda resigned from the board 2 weeks later, citing health reasons. Elias didn't change. He still tended his garden at 0500. He still kept to himself. But now, when he polished that piece of black metal, he wasn't doing it alone. The neighborhood watched over it with him, understanding finally that the quietest man on the
street was the strongest one among them.
true strength isn't loud. And true heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear scars and tend quiet gardens. Never judge a book by its cover. You never know who you're dealing with. If this story moved you, don't forget to show your support. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. We bring you true tales of courage, sacrifice, and honor. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and never forget the heroes among us.